All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today is May 10th, 2022. It's a little bit after 1 in the afternoon. We're here for Maryland Public Service Commission PC54, the Montgomery County Community Choice Aggregation Workgroup. My name is Jennifer Grace. I'm the Public Utility Law Judge assigned to this matter. Today, let's talk about where we are and what we're talking about today. We have several data requests that everyone should have received. You should have received staff's response to Potomac Edison's data request on May 6th. Separate responses from PE and then also from the Excellent companies on May 6th to staff's data request. And then BGE and PEPCO's response to Montgomery County's data request. That was on April the 27th. April the 29th, you should have received a proposed schedule from staff. And then provided today were comments from AOBA, from Montgomery County, and just recently a spreadsheet with estimated cost impacts from staff today. So hopefully everyone has received all of those documents. If you haven't, you can email me separately and I'll try to get them to you. And then just one other business matter. We were scheduled to start meeting at 10 o'clock at the next meeting on May 24th. We're going to push that to May 31st. We'll continue to start at 1 o'clock on May 24th, and then we'll go to a 10 o'clock start on May 31st. The reason is there's a PIP meeting that's already scheduled for the morning of May 24th. And I've already changed that in Zoom. So if it's attached to your calendar, you should have gotten a notification. Okay. I just want to go ahead and turn it over, and I see a hand raised. Okay. I'm not sure who has their hand raised, but go ahead.
Your Honor, are we going to go to weekly meetings? Is that why we're having a meeting on the 24th and then another one on the 31st?
We're going to go. Oh, is it May 31st? Hang on a second. I might have my dates wrong. No, we're not going to go to weekly meetings yet. So it will be the next one after. Let's see, what is today? May 10th. It'll be June 7th. Thank you. It'll be June 7th that we'll go starting at 10. I mean, yeah, starting at 10. We're not going to go to weekly meetings just yet. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to see if anybody has any questions of any of the other parties or anyone has any statements that they want to make about their positions at this time.
So, Your Honor, this is Jeff Trout for Potomac Edison, and I apologize in advance. I'm going to be in and out of this meeting because of a medical commitment that has me tied up the rest of this week. But I'm going to participate as much as I can today. Potomac Edison has looked at all the materials from all the parties, and we remain firmly committed to what staff is calling option 3 and what we've called the low cost, no cost approach to implementing enrollments for customers who move into the service territory after the start of the CCA.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to staff. I have a question for staff first, though. I just got the preliminary estimate of cost impact, and it seems like I haven't taken a thorough look at it yet, but it seems like I'm trying to pull it open right now. It seems like the estimates that you have provided, come on, please open, for the Instant Connect for all 3 utilities differs significantly from what the estimate is from the utilities. And I'm wondering what the difference is.
Your Honor, can you hear me?
Yeah,
This is Phil Vanderhagen from staff. So we can walk through that if we have Dave on the line now, but the part of you're asking about the Instant Connect option. There is an allocation we're doing in there that's based on an assumption that cost recovery for Instant Connect would reflect recovery through POR discount rates in a manner that's consistent with previous types of programming costs. So what we're doing there is allocating the number of residential accounts in each of the service territories, along with the number of the number of accounts in Montgomery County that would be on the CCA, along with the current level of retail switching that is present in each of those service territories. So I think the figures are something. If you look down there on I think it's lines 10, lines 18, and line 27. In the PEPCO service territory, there will be about 2/3. Once the CCA comes online, and assuming it doesn't lose customers, the total amount of retail choice accounts, including the CCA would be about 2/3 of the total accounts. So we just added the existing amount of retail choice switching, and sort of assumes that that's not going to change between now and then. And it's 2/3 with PE. The CCA would reflect 4/7 of the. These are sort of rounded fractional figures. 4/7 of the total of retail choice once the CCA is in effect, and in BG&E it would be only 1/25. So that's how the allocations are performed. I'll let Dave talk more to that as well if I missed anything.
No, Phil, I think you got it.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think what we did here is we combined the data we got back through the DRs last week with some preliminary calculations we had made about the amount of dollars that could be collected, given some estimates about retail choice revenue that would occur in Montgomery County over the course of the years of the pilot. And so what we're developing there is, if you look in your column C, that is showing you the annualized cost, and those are simple amortizations of the cost that is shown in column B, which is the total. So for each of the utilities, they gave us figures, with the exception, I think, of BG&E on some. We had to do some sort of substitution there. The total cost, but we basically applied an annualization of that over the pilot period to come up with the annualized costs, and then arriving at the in column F, your total residential POR discount rate that reflects recovering those programming costs on the annualized rate shown in column C over the life of the program, assuming certain levels of retail sales would persist. I think the assumption there is that you're not experiencing a large drop in the number of accounts back to SOS or to other retail sales.
Yeah. So a couple other points. So column D, which is residential uncollectible costs. These are recent averages for residential uncollectible costs pre-COVID for each of the utilities. So if you look, for example, in cell D6, D7, D8, they're the same for all the different options. But I looked at 2 or 3 POR filings pre-COVID and looked at approximate amounts of residential uncollected costs, as well as residential late fee revenues as a percentage of billed revenue. And so that's the sources there. And you can see there are some differences between the utilities based on the history. recent history pre-COVID. And then, as Phil said, column F is the discount rate you arrive at, for basically recovering uncollectible costs less any late fee revenue plus those annualized programming costs.
Dave, can you explain what column G, H, and I do?
Yes. So the supplier coordination tariffs have additional fees that are not recovered through POR rates. So they have administration fees, and then 2 out of 3 of the utilities, so PEPCO and BGE, charge basically for each bill. And so these are the costs of the annual administration fee and annual billing. So for PEPCO, for example, the cost to the CCA, assuming all SOS customers become CCA customers, the annual billing cost to the CCA would be about $2 million a year. So you can contrast that with the annualized programming costs for the 3 options. And then in column I, what we were doing is we're showing total costs to the CCA on an annualized basis as a percent of billed revenue. So including columns G and H, as well as column F, and you get a total amount of basically the CCA has to pay under utility consolidated billing. So to kind of give you an idea of, how does the costs of programming compare to the costs of uncollectible costs plus just the costs listed in the supplier coordination tariff.
And Dave, just so folks understand, the column H costs, that's reflective of what's the rate per bill each month that the suppliers pay?
So for PE, there is no rate per bill. For BGE, I believe it's 50 cents per bill. For PEPCO, I think it's 62 cents for residential and 75, I believe, for commercial.
So you're just multiplying the number of accounts times 12 months times the monthly bill rate to get your 2.1 in column H for PEPCO, et cetera.
Yes.
And then the annual admin fees, can you talk about how that gets developed?
Yeah, so there's annual admin fees in the supplier coordination tariffs. For Potomac Edison BGE, it's a fee per megawatt load. So we used an estimate of megawatt load based on current SOS load, again, assuming all SOS customers shift to the CCA. And then for PEPCO, the annual fee is $1 per megawatt hour load. $1 per megawatt hour fee. So we take the megawatt hours for SOS and assume that's the CCA. But for PEPCO and BG, the biggest chunk is the fee for the consolidated billing.
Dave, I don't know if you can see Leah's comment. She's asking to explain the cost sharing between retail choice and the CCA, which I think is what we're showing as the programming costs in columns B and C, but broken down into that allocation.
Correct. So Leah, we assumed for this that the cost of Instant Connect programming is shared across all retail choice customers, including the CCA. So all retail choice customers in PEPCO plus CCA customers, all CCA customers as retail choice customers. So, that means that about 2/3 of the Instant Connect cost would be allocated to the CCA for PEPCO. So adding up, the total is the assumed number of CCA customers plus the retail choice customers currently in Pepco. And the numerator is the total CCA customers. So we're dividing CCA customers by total CCA customers plus total retail choice customers in Pepco now. If, for example, that was allocated more widely, for example, to all distribution customers, that would lower the amount of Instant Connect programming costs allocated to the CCA. But we use this as a first pass for allocation. And as Phil said, I believe at least some programming costs were recovered through POR with this approximately allocation. So in terms of seeing the calculations, it's just row 10. So Pepco told us the cost of Instant Connect is $2.8 million, and it's literally just multiplying $2.8 million times 2/3. And then for PE, they told us the cost of Instant Connects was $674,000, and that's literally just multiplied by 4/7. And for BGE, they told us the cost of Instant Connects is 2.8 million and multiplied by 1 divided by 25.
And I think Leah's comment looked like she was asking about what happens if that gets allocated to distribution customers through base rates. So I think, and Dave, I don't know if it's in column or row, like we're looking at Pepco, the 1.866667 in column B, row 7, that does not include or does include whatever costs it requires. I don't know if we add the FTP development costs in there as well, because for Instant Connect to work, you still have to provide the information to the CCA so that they can make the enrollment.
So yeah, I would defer to the utilities on if their Instant Connect cost estimates included the cost of creating an FTP. But you know, it's quite a bit lower.
Zero. If that is not recovered at all from retail choice through POR, there's the expectation that the Instant Connect cost recovery would go through base rates. Is that, I think, maybe what she's asking?
Can you repeat the question?
I think Leah was asking, maybe Leah can just chime in if she wants to ask this more directly. If the Instant Connect cost was allocated through base rates, we would not be suggesting recovery through the POR rates. So I guess a significant portion of what's in line 7 would not be incorporated, and I don't know if that means it goes to zero, because there still would be some other work that needs to be done there.
Yes, if the Instant Connect costs were allocated across all distribution customers, maybe this would go to zero, but there would still be the FTP costs.
Right. All right, well, there's some other stuff in the comments. I don't know if folks just want to ask their questions or what, but I don't know, Judge Grace, did that answer what you were asking about?
Yeah, that was very helpful for my question, but there are several other questions in the comment box. I'm trying to see if I can share both the comment box and the, I can't. David, I don't know if you can see the comment box.
Yeah, so I can see that. I can open up both the comment box and your shared screen. So
Okay.
Stan's comment is what, like, is there a party advocating Instant Connect as a preferred option for the CCA? So Phil, to you.
I think we still are looking at the Instant Connect from an affordability standpoint. I think what this analysis is telling us is that the mirror is only sort of reasonably, cost if we're trying to collect all the costs through the CCA as a POR discount rate. That's kind of how we set this up. The mirror is only sort of affordable, and that means that it reflects a POR discount rate that's comparable to what is in place right now for the rest of retail choice, which we thought was a good way to make that comparison. So the mirror is sort of affordable in Pepco and PE, but not in BG&E because there's only 10,000 customers, whereas the other two have costs that are more in line with the number of accounts. Instant Connect is affordable based on what we just went through in all three of the service territories, and I think it really kind of depends what the county wants to do. I think we saw from Lisa's email that there was some interest in using this method if the commission were to order this, perhaps separately. So that's kind of, I think, why that question is being asked maybe by the retail suppliers. I don't know if that got to Stan's issue. So, and the FTP is is the low cost approach. And if that is the sole consideration, I think that ends up where you end up making your decision. But we tried to analyze this as to how these costs would be imposed or recovered through the POR discount rate. And given the various other pros and cons and issues we've raised, I think the Instant Connect ends up being something that gives you a significant bang for the buck, not only for this program, but it sort of allows you to leverage some cost sharing for retail choice and achieves a couple other policy goals. Like, again, it's kind of up to the county how they want to do this. There are definitely some issues that we want to resolve with each of the methods if those are still developed. But I think what this is showing us is that two of the options are affordable in all three service territories. One is only affordable in Pepco and PE, and that's kind of, I think, where we landed at this point.
Where did the figure in V16 come from?
So B16, just Grace, make sure
Yes.
I'm referencing the correct cell. Potomac Edison stated as part of their DR response, the cost of Instant Connects, the total cost in their DR response was $674,000. So that's what's written in row 18. So we multiplied that 674,000 times 4/7.
So times the amount of CCE customers over the amount of CCE customers plus other choice customers.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So, and BG and Pepco, Exelon did not provide a cost estimate for the mirror. And we know they have said it was more than the $2.8 million. So, we essentially had to pick a number knowing it was more than 2.8 and didn't want to be too conservative. So that's where the $5 million come from. So we know it's more than the Instant Connection option, but we weren't given a precise number. Whereas PE did give us a cost for the mirror.
This is.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I have a lot of problems with these numbers. I don't think that these numbers, which are given to us at 1 o'clock today, necessarily can be relied on. And in particular, I'm concerned that staff starts by understating by a factor of 3 the cost of Instant Connects for Potomac Edison. So it just goes on from there. but let's start. We can start with that. We said it was approximately $1 million, and staff has it as 385,234. I have no idea how they came up with calculating it down to the dollar, but and then POR isn't necessarily the right mechanism for the cost recovery. That's a whole discussion in and of itself. And then if we were going to use POR for cost recovery, and in particular, if we were going to use POR for cost recovery for a retail supplier boon of Instant Connects, I think it's time for the commission to reconsider the way it has artificially suppressed purchase of receivable rates by pretending that utilities actually make money by relieving retail suppliers of their uncollectible risk. The bottom line from all of those questions are that these numbers that got sprung on us as this meeting commenced are not numbers that you can or should base any decisions on necessarily.
And this is Susan from representing BGE and PHI here in PEPCO. So that would be a similar statement for us. So there's no way Instant Connect is going to go in for BGE at $412,000. That's just not happening. It's a $2.8 million project, regardless of how many users or customers would benefit from it. The costs are still the same to perform the project, and that would be the same for PEPCO or PHI. So I'm not sure. When we said 2.8 million, we meant it's going to cost 2.8 million to do the programming and to present the project, and it's at least a year-long project. So that changes nothing to us if there's 10 customers that can use it or 780,000 that can use it. The cost would still be the same.
So looking at at staff's cost estimate here, the cost for Instant Connects in BG and PEPCO is $2.8 million. So if you look at row 10, it says 2/3
per OPCO. That's per OPCO.
Agreed. We have $2.8 million for PEPCO, $2.8 million for BGE. And then there's an assumption that if Instant Connect is also benefiting retail choice, the CCA is not the only one paying for Instant Connect. So that is shown in the allocation, 2/3 of $2.8 million. It is not saying it's not a $2.8 million project. It's saying recovery specifically from the CCA is 2/3 of that amount for PEPCO and 1/25 of that amount for BGE. But it includes the 2.8 million for BGE as well.
Okay, Stan, I see that your hand is raised, but I'm going to get to you in just a second. Lori McGilvray and Ashish Mehta both asked some really good questions. Standing back, what are the policy goals that would be achieved through Instant Connect? How are they related to the CCA? And why has the commission been resistant to Instant Connect in the past? Can someone from staff answer those questions?
Well, let's this is Phil. I'll try and address the second question first, because I think I know the answer to that. So Instant Connect and Seamless Move were both rejected by the commission. And I'm going to say from recollection, and anyone else who knows better, correct? The commission looked at that back in 2018 in the CCMC work group, and it was ultimately decided that those were not beneficial relative to the expected cost at the time. That's all in, I think there's a report that came out from that work group in January, like maybe of 2018, that sort of addressed that, or I'm not sure if I have the right year. So the commission looked at Seamless Move and Instant Connect and said, these are, not themselves, useful functions, but at the time they had just done, I guess, RM54 and had implemented 3-day switching, and I think the decision was not to move forward based on cost. Now you have seamless move because of a legislative requirement to put that in place. And I don't know that anything was done in the CCMC group specifically to reject the use of Instant Connect at the time, but I think they, and I guess I was not present for this. I know there are folks on this call that were involved in that can provide their interpretation of it. But my understanding is it was not part of the law, so they didn't move forward with it. And as for I think the first question was, what is the benefit of Instant Connect? So I think we began looking at Instant Connect as a means to achieve a default enrollment that was as close as we could get to the mirror approach, which essentially is proposed as working exactly the same way the customer experience is for an SOS enrollment, and for a new customer, which is not really an enrollment as much as just an assignment by default. So the Instant Connect has a couple more moving parts, and it's suboptimal to the mirror approach as a means of kind of implementing the default assignment. But in terms of minimizing the amount of time and allowing for the assignment, or in this case, the enrollment to the CCA to sort of begin processing prior to the account becoming active, it allows at least that to occur in a manner that is also allowed by the mirror, but that, I mean, you're looking at Instant Connect because the mirror is being rejected solely on cost. Now, there are other folks that may advocate for Instant Connect because of its benefits to the retail choice markets. There certainly are other jurisdictions, Pennsylvania in particular, that adopted it years ago. And that was done, from my understanding, without being directly involved at all, as a choice market enhancement. And there are folks that advocate for that. But I don't think we're making that case. We're just sort of noting that it is a way that's affordable, especially if costs are shared with the rest of the retail choice cost recovery. And that sets aside, the clear policy decision that would have to be made whether or not Instant Connect, if it were to be implemented statewide, would be solely recovered through a PR discount rate, which is, I think, a fair policy decision to have to make. So does that satisfy or answer the questions that were posed?
Lori or Ashish?
Yes, this is Lori. Thank you, Phil. I do have a follow-up. So it sounded to me from the policy perspective that you were framing it largely as a way to address the question of default and sort of the default means kind of on day one, that assumption. So from a legal standpoint, do you believe that there's a necessity that there be a default on day one? And the reason I ask is, we're keeping in mind that the benefits of Instant Connect to the CCA are only accruing to this small number of new customers who come into the territory and start a new account. So it's a very small percentage of CCA customers overall. And from my perspective, the downside is that it could take 13 months to establish the necessary programming for this. And we all know that, doing something for the first time sometimes has glitches. So I would be very concerned that it could serve to delay the initiation of the CCA or burden the implementation of the CCA with a glitchy, startup. When my feeling is, I agree with the county that the option 3 alternative is the least costly, simplest, and most flexible for any changes in the future.
All right, let me try and see if I can answer a couple things in there. So I'm not a lawyer, and so I'm not attempting to make a legal interpretation. I think when we've looked at the wording in the law, there's language that's sort of shared between SOS and the SOS law, and I'm thinking of 7-510 is the section that where this picks up. Forget which variant of it in there, which section it is, but so I think you have this language that says the customer is deemed to have selected SOS if they don't choose a retail supply offer. In the language that sort of establishes SOS as default. I don't think they actually talk about it as the default service. I think it simply says it has to be there and available, and it says the customer, if they don't do anything else, they're deemed to have selected. So that similar language is used in where it addresses what happens when a customer moves in and establishes a new account in Montgomery County, where they're deemed to have selected the CCA if they have not selected SOS and if they have not selected a retail choice. Now I know that language is fraught with a lot of controversy for a number of things. So I think we're just looking at that and reading into that perhaps something that suggests that the way a customer gets enrolled in the CCA is going to be consistent with the way a customer enrolls in SOS right now. So it sort of happens by default without them taking any action in the absence of an affirmative selection for SOS or for retail choice. So I think that's where we went down the road of looks like we should build this such that they get on SOS right away. That's kind of, one can argue the legal stuff, and I'm not really trying to develop that interpretation right here. That's kind of, I think, why we went that way with this. The other thing, and we're doing community aggregation for the first time here in Maryland. We have a little bit of anecdotal discussions with some of the folks in like Ohio, and I think a little bit about how things may have worked in California. But there is, I think, a sort of desire to make sure that how this is being implemented such that a customer is enrolled. What are they going to see on their bill? And I think we're spending time talking about the new enrollment process and what customers. It is a small number of customers. I think we're looking at somewhere between 1% and 3%. 3 might be on the high end of a number of accounts that essentially are changing their address within the service territory, either leaving it or moving within it each month based on the numbers that we have from PR. So it's a small amount, but I think one of the things we are thinking about there is there a potential to lose customers or confuse customers when they move in and get their first bill if they have more than one entity that's on the retail supply. Is it the SOS or is it the CCA? Will they make a comparison there that's favorable from one to the other? And then, once we have the CCA in place, is the CCA actually the default supply? Is that actually the price that the customer should be making their retail choice decisions against, or should they still be making that against the standard offer service? So, if SOS is in fact the price to compare, then maybe it's totally fine because that price is going to be on their electric bill anyway. But if the CCA is the price to compare, then the SOS enjoys a situation where the SOS is put on their bill and the customer maybe is going to make a decision about dropping the CCA and going to SOS, and there could be another similarly priced option or an option that has the same type of green content that the CCA has that they're not aware of. And so does that create sort of a new enrollment dynamic that has the potential to cause customers to slowly drop off the CCA if the information they're presented with at that time sort of changes the way their decision making. So that's just kind of something we're trying to understand, but putting them right on the CCA, if that were possible, I think sort of gets away from having that be part of that determination. And there's probably some other things in there that, I'm not really thinking hard about, other retail choice, competitive issues, and that sort of thing. But that may, I think those are the two areas where we were thinking, and also probably thinking about what is the impact of standard offer service if there is a certain amount of load within Montgomery County that's sort of fluctuating on a regular basis because customers go onto it for a couple of days and then come back off. And maybe a fourth issue is once the county decides how they're going to implement their enrollment process, if they were to sort of build in like a normal delay that maybe swept customers in every week or every 2 weeks or even longer, does that create any sort of long-term issues for standard offer service where the amount of customers moving back and forth gets to a point where it has an impact on the SOS load that folks involved in wholesale bidding have to kind of take account of? And that we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about either, but I think those two things also came up when relating to the SOS supply. Lori, I don't know, that was long-winded. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was helpful. I will note that, with regard to the transparency issue of a customer who may see with option 3C both the SOS rate and the CCA rate on their bill, that the CCA in the law makes it clear that the customer needs to be informed of their choices, SOS, retail, CCA. So there should be transparency anyway. I understand that creates a situation where there is just limited transparency, but the county has certainly stated its intent to make sure that customers know their choices and are making choices.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, maybe I think worst case scenario, but what if the CCA price diverges from SOS in a negative, way, so that customers see, get on and they just start dropping right away. And I know that SB 31 requires the commission to approve all of the rates that are going to be on, retail choice rates for low income customers or customers on energy assistance. We'll need to sort that out, but what do we do if those rates become distinct such that they don't qualify under whatever guidelines the commission established? So that's a separate issue, perhaps CCA, but I think the not that we're evaluating failure modes at this point, but if the CCA has commitments that reflect a certain amount of load and load starts dropping for one reason or the other, how do you prevent sort of that spiraling or changing in a way more rapid than what you're able to deal with? So.
We're going to go to Stan Edwards and then Fran Francis, but first, Phil, when he was responding about kind of the history of Instant Connect, talked about the CCMC work group in the beginning of 2018. If anybody wants to read up on that, that was RM62, competitive markets and retail gas and electric customer choice. But we'll go to Stan. Go ahead, Stan.
Thank you, Judge. I guess I just go back to my original question about why are we spending time focusing on Instant Connect? Is there anybody advocating for this as the preferred option for adding customers to the CCA?
Staff, which option are you advocating for?
Well, I think we have tried to evaluate this a couple different ways, but if Instant Connect is developed simultaneous with the CCA, we think it's going to be potentially, more bang for the buck, and eliminate some of the concerns we had about the way the enrollment process works. So, I think if the county's coming forward and saying, look, we don't want to deal with that, I don't think we're trying to press that. But some of the emails, Dan, your attorney sent something around that indicated that if Instant Connect was a viable option or being deployed, that the county would want that as the enrollment approach.
Well, we
So
would,
is that not, are we
we
reading
would-
that wrong?
we would consider that we would take advantage of that, just like everyone else can take advantage of it. And the costs should be shared across the entire customer base, since it's a, a market change that applies to all customers. It's really not connected to the CCA.
Okay, so you're basically your position is that you would prefer to go with option 3 at this time.
Yes.
Okay.
So if that's the case, does that mean that staff is satisfied with going forward with option 3?
I think we would probably want to talk amongst ourselves and get back to you more formally, if that's all right.
Okay, Stan, anything else?
No, thank you.
Fran Francis. You're muted. I don't know if you're trying to talk.
Sorry. I just wanted to make it clear. We don't believe that there's any place in the statute where the CCA becomes the default supplier. So whether it's a new customer moving into the county or it's an existing customer in the county, we believe that both of those groups of customers are entitled to the same notice provisions of how to become a community choice participant. You're allowed to sign up with a supplier, you're allowed to choose SOS, or you do it by default because you don't respond. But in any event, there is a very specific notice requirement. So whatever way we go, we believe that notice requirement should stand. In terms of socializing costs to all customers, whether they're my members who are on SOS or my members who are in Prince George's County, we believe that any of the changes that we are doing specifically to accommodate the CCA should not be socialized over any group of customers other than those who are choosing the CCA or Montgomery County. So I just wanted to make AOVA's position clear that that's where we're coming from. We have many members who purchase from BG&E. We have members who are in Prince George's County. We have SOS participants, and we have competitive supplier participants. We don't want those costs socialized over any group other than the ones who are participating in the CCA if the changes made are to initiate the CCA or to benefit the CCA. That's all I have, Judge Grace.
Sorry, I'm finishing up my notes. Okay, thank you. I don't know if you saw, Fran, but Stan Edwards indicated in the comments that the county agrees there's a notice requirement for all customers. And I believe when we were first talking about option 3, I think we talked about that duty would be on the CCA, not on the utilities. Is that right, Stan?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Stan and Judge Grace.
Okay. Any more comments on this spreadsheet by staff that we've been discussing, or questions or snide remarks? Okay. Any more questions or statements based on any of the filings that were made in the last couple of weeks? Staff, would you like for me to set out a breakout room so you all can go and discuss what your position is?
I think we would probably want to get back to you after the meeting, because I think we're going to want to take some time, and it might not be something that we want to try to accomplish during the course of this call.
Okay, the goal was today to have all positions and comments prior to this meeting so that we could discuss it. All right, staff, what else we need to discuss?
I think that's all. If we're basically wrapping up the discussion of costs, and folks are more or less, ready to move forward, I think we can, we may need to circle back and address kind of what needs to be done with, any of the other details that were kind of developed as part of the discussion on billing enrollment. I think maybe what we would probably want to do next, based on, we circulated the draft working group schedule, I guess last week or week before. So what we should do this month, and I'm not trying to there's further discussion on any of the enrollment issues. We can circle back around to that. But I think what we're probably going to want to do is produce something that sort of documents how we almost need like a business plan for this. Probably each of the utilities would have a distinct set of business rules under which they're going to operate. So I think that needs to be sort of drafted up and circulated. We've more or less, I think, covered much of what we thought we were going to. I think we have everything that we need based on discussions since the beginning of this year on what's going to happen relative to billing, the transition period, and the enrollment. We just sort of need to probably put that down into kind of a formal document that describes, I don't know if that'll look like kind of a model that each utility will sort of follow, or if it ends up being each utility wants to put something together on their own. But we sort of need to sort of finalize that and put it into a document, and so people can see that. I think we will need that document when we are later on in the summer, when we are going to be looking at all of the rules we're going to need to implement. So, and you have the chart up there. Hopefully everybody can see the table. All of the bullets, if drop down to the July, August, those are all the bullets that the legislation talks about where they're expecting to see regulation to implement it. So that's a lot of topics. We need to, when we get to that, we're going to need to know precisely what we're implementing from billing and enrollment. Some of those things are going to play into here. There are going to be some other things we'll need to that are new we haven't talked about, like all of the disclosures and that sort of thing. But I think we need to have a couple of things that a nice little explanation how this is going to work, kind of from an operational standpoint, and then from that. And I think, at this point, we're going to have everybody more or less on board with how it's going to work. If we're reaching a more or less consensus on it, then we can draft regs from that. So what we probably need to do between now and the next meeting is get from either the utilities separately or the utilities jointly a model of what their business rules would look like, so that one could have sort of a document that says, okay, you're going to operate in the CCA, here's what it's going to look like. And then we'll use that to make sure that we're writing rules that conform to what we just all figured out. So that's probably something we need to do next. Then moving a little further, like the second or the third bullet there is, I think we're going to need to start work on what the aggregation approval or the aggregation plan approval process looks like. So I think the county has a couple of things they have to do on there, and to establish the legislation to enact the the CCA, and then it will need to put an application together so that the commission can, approve it. And that has to happen, I think, can't happen any earlier than the end of 23. But then the commission presumably will get that late 23, early 24, make that decision on approval within, I don't know if there's a set period of time for it, but there's within the first 2 months of 24, that'll have to get all knocked out. So probably our next move as a work group is to, after we sort of lay out the business rules as a written document, we'll need from the county what they are planning to propose to the commission so that we can sort of work out, what the commission's gonna consider. So a straw man aggregation plan, I mean, that might be, I know we have examples that we've looked at from Ohio that we can send around or provide links to. And I'm sure there are others in some of the other jurisdictions that have done this. So other commissions have approved aggregation plans. And so we probably have a couple of things we can model on. So I'm hoping that's not real hard to do. And then as part of that development process, we should sort of lay out when we would expect to get the plan to the commission. I think the county has some things they have to do on their end before they can do that for the legislation. And we would probably want to, get everyone on the same page as the expectations of how long the commission would have and what the procedural schedule for approving the plan would look like.
Phil, this is Robbie, real fast.
Yep.
I'm not understanding what is the responsibility of the utility. Should be Montgomery County drafting these requirements. All we're doing is providing the information on the FTP list.
So the aggregation plan is something the county will provide. Are you asking about?
You said you're gonna meet with all the utilities for our business plan. I mean, the business plan for us is the FTP site, correct?
Yeah. So I think we need something that kind of lays out. I don't want to call it business rules, but maybe that's the word that comes to mind when I've heard people talk about sort of kind of laying out a document that explains the process. So we just went over. We just spent the last couple of weeks working on the new enrollments post transition, but I think, and maybe we already have a lot of this from some of the outlines, but if you were putting together like a set of instructions for the retail choice entity that was going to function as the CCA's supplier, and you want to tell them, look, this is what you have to do. This is when we're going to test with you. This is how you're going to do your billing. This is going to,
But no, I mean,
we're going to do on the transition. All the stuff we talked about, it sort of worked out like what's going to happen. Would you produce like a document that explained to them what they needed to do for you?
but if they're a third-party supplier, they know how to do this already. I mean,
Okay,
post
much
implementation is
right. Much of it would
I mean,
be that, right? Because we adopted all of the third-party supply, like billing procedures and all that. And so maybe all you would have something is they, see this document or whatever. But what about what happens during the process pre-transition and then at the time of transition? I think we all agreed on everything. So I don't think there's any disagreement about like what's going to happen.
no.
But would you want to describe to them what their requirements are so that they can have something like a roadmap? Because we're going to have to write some regs that say who, and I think people were kind of particular about when certain things went out, which entities, like, for example, and I apologize, I'm forgetting all the details of what we talked about for the transition part, but like you're going to send a list out to the CCA's supplier. They're going to do some things with that. And then, that happens, I think, in 23. Right as they're forming the CCA. And then there's another list that goes out and you're not screening it, but they have to screen it, so we just have to
Right. Yeah, I'm saying it just sounds more like responsibility on the CCA versus the utility. I mean, and the way you were wording it was like, we have to do all of these requirements and everything, and it just seemed like the burden
well,
was
you're
back
right.
on the utility. It's not.
Probably, no, I mean, no, you're right. It's not like solely the utilities role, but I guess I was thinking of it as you're sort of they're going to interact with you. And I thought you would want to have sort of some things that they'll need to adhere to in order to make that happen. And then we would need to make sure we wrote rules that were consistent with that.
Right. Okay.
So it's not like you got to go do it. I mean, obviously the county and the CCA folks, they're going to be on the receiving end of those requirements. I mean, I guess you both will have some requirements in there. Says it's not solely on you, but we need to sort of get that written up so that we're all looking at the same thing and everybody understands what this means, because we want to write rules that are consistent with something that, when it comes time to actually do all this, and of course you're going to want all this before you do any programming of anything. Like actually, if you do your option 2, you're not doing a whole lot of programming.
Exactly.
Whatever you're doing with the transition is going to require some things to go from the utility,
Right.
to
Right.
the CCA, and then I think we all agreed like who was going to do screening and how they were going to. So, I mean, I think everybody's going to be interested in what this thing says, but we do need some way to sort of get this sort of put together. That I just think we should have a document that sort of describes everything that we, from that really is like someone who's going to go do it can read this and go, okay, I see what my responsibilities are. I see what your responsibilities are. We all agree that I'm going to do this at this date, and then I'm going to get this from you, and I'm going to, et cetera. That's what I'm talking about. Is that, you guys okay with that, or?
No, that makes more sense. But I mean, because you just left out the CCA or Montgomery County in your list. You just said utilities. So I want to make sure that. But you make sure it's not all the utilities doing all of this work. I mean, there's things that the Montgomery County has to abide by as well, as far as how often do they want the list and how often will they download the list, et cetera. Everything that was in the those data requests that we answered. So.
Right. Well, and that, you're right. For like the post-transition new account enrollment process, there needs to be,
Right.
a very particular
Yep.
set of here's what happens. But actually, I was just thinking back to all the discussions that we had about the transition where we're going to shift 200,000 accounts over a 30-day period at 10,000 accounts per day for PEPCO at least. How that's going to work, and I just assumed that the company would want to sort of put some guardrails around that and like write that down and make sure everybody was okay with it or understood what their responsibilities were, because we have some of that stuff is things we have to write rules about. If you just look down at the list here in the list of the topics, there are things in there that we're supposed to write rules on. So protocol for data exchange between CCA, retail suppliers, they want a rule for that. Like, procedures to transfer load from the SOS under the aggregation plan. We need rules for that. So we're going to want to, we should like write like a description of what's going to happen, who's responsible for what, and then make that into a set of rules. And I think that'll be helpful because now you'll have a document, people can just read it in plain English and say, okay, here's what's going to happen. And then when we write rules, we'll be writing rules from something everyone's already seen, agreed to, and is happy with.
Yeah, but keep in mind also, suppliers, they already sign agreements with the utilities. So they're already bound by whatever's in the supplier tariffs. So this would be in addition to to that.
Well, so for all for the billing, I think everyone is agreeable to the idea that the billing is pretty much standard retail choice utility consolidated billing. So for that piece, it's like you're going to do follow the tariff section, whatever tells you how to do billing. But in particular, transferring customers from SOS to the CCA, there isn't an existing tariff that does that or any documentation. We're setting this up now. So I think we need a document for that, and I think the utilities have a strong interest in describing what they want to happen. So Robbie, with PEPCO with 200,000, maybe you're doing something differently than PG&E's doing. It's only 10,000, or with PE. So that's kind of what what I'm thinking of there.
Okay.
So that's kind of, I mean, that's probably something we need to put in place. And I would almost recommend, Your Honor, I would recommend that, if that gets drafted up, and I guess I'm asking the utilities maybe take an initial crack at putting that together, and then whatever support the county can provide in assisting them with what they want to do. And I know maybe, like Stan, I know we were sort of asking you to start thinking about things that you're going to need to think about when you go and obtain your supply source, whatever that is, if that's a retail supply supplier, or if you're still looking at sort of composing your supply of portfolio elements that aren't specifically just a retail supply. So, I mean, I think the county and the county's experts in the area of how you're going to implement your CCA will need to be sitting in a room with the folks at the utilities who are going to be sort of laying out the requirements, make sure you're all on the same page. I think we've already agreed to all these things, at least for that piece. And so that just needs to get sort of written up. I think we could probably, and unless folks want to actually have more meetings, sit down and go over that, we probably could just look at a draft of that, circulate that, let folks make comments via email, and then, maybe adds or subtracts, and then any folks that have questions or comments, maybe might be simpler to have a meeting, do some interaction on it, but maybe at the first pass, send some drafts around and get folks comfortable with what that would look like. It might be helpful if one utility starts and develops something that works, for everyone, so that each utility doesn't have to independently develop the document. That sort of follows along the idea of developing like a model tariff or a model set of instructions or whatever you want to call this. It's not a tariff. I mean, ultimately, we probably will need a tariff for some of these things. It may only be a temporary tariff. It reflects, the transition period, but post-enrollment or post-transition, there's probably a need to have some of these things laid out if there are timing requirements and that sort of. So I think going forward to sort of operate under this schedule that we sent around, we'll finalize sort of the last bit of the enrollment issue, and then we will sort of need to develop some documentation. That can sort of happen, I think, concurrent with beginning to think about what the aggregation plan looks like, but I maybe want to talk to the county folks and see what type of scale of, when the county would be, ready to start putting together their aggregation plan, so that we have sort of a straw man plan to look at, so we can figure out how much time it's going to take to approve it. And it might be that we're sort of cookie cuttering this based on what's been done in some other jurisdictions, and maybe the various suppliers that are operating in some of those can also help with, if they have aggregation plans they've either worked on, participated in, or otherwise are familiar with, we can get something like that put together. But I think that's our next step. And hopefully we can get that knocked out through, the end of June. I know regs can take a long time to develop, but once we have a good, solid written plan document to base it on, writing the regs to sort of comply with the expected procedure is, I think, a lot easier to do. So can I Stan, I don't know, can you talk for the county? Does this work for you guys in terms of getting a straw man together for your aggregation plan, and so we can kind of figure out what it's going to take to get it through the commission?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, Phil. I agree. There's issues we have to work through here, but I think working together we can come up with it.
Okay, I mean, we can help you out with that. I know that I think we may have already sent you some of the stuff we got from Ohio, and you may, do your own research. May already have a lot of that stuff anyway, but we can certainly assist with that as you need.
Yeah, I think this legislation is similar to other pieces of legislation, that the vision when it's drafted and the actual implementation sometimes don't quite match up. So we'll have some issues to work through, but that's all part of the fun.
Right. I don't know. It will be interesting to see how, I think the legislation may require approval of your rates as early as the beginning of 2024. And I'm curious to know how we're going to deal with that, because it does seem to be a little bit tricky. If the transition is actually going to occur in October of 24, if you actually have to put rates in front of the commission 10 months before that, that may create an issue there. So there's some things in there that we probably need to think about to make sure, like, it's not going to put a bug into your sort of procurement process. But,
Yeah.
And
Your Honor,
I was just going to say, one of the things that would be helpful to us is have and we can discuss this offline, probably a better understanding of the, the timing it takes for the commission to receive our plan and approve the plan. And so that helps us with scheduling things.
Right. Well, so that from the bullet on drafting a procedural schedule for that, I mean, that can be as draft as we need it to be. But if we look at what's going to be presented, there's a whole list of things in the law that describe what should be in your plan.
Yeah.
And I think, we looked at a couple examples, and it didn't look too super complicated. Like, it's kind of like, if you have more than one rate, there's probably a need to figure that out. But if it's a simple rate, at least to begin, and I don't know what happens if rates change over time, there's probably some procedures for a lot of that stuff. But I think what we can have at the end of June is more or less sort of like a straw man, like it might be, we're adopting as a straw man a plan that was used in some other state because it covers everything we need to do. And so, this is the evidence that's going to be presented to the commission for the purpose of approving this. And I know there's, some protection requirements and rules. Some of that, is particular to your aggregation plan. It sort of has to, but because we're going to have rules already approved, they just have to be consistent with those rules. And so if we've drafted the rules and we drafted the plan, hopefully it's easy to approve such a thing because we know it's consistent because we already sort of did that. So, but I think we sort of want to make sure that the commission approves it like very early in the spring, like maybe like at the end of like maybe 60 days after you file it. I think might be a requirement for timing, and have to look at the log. It has to be pretty fast in order to get everything ready and in place for October. So so your folks, and would maybe need to have sort of something you would like to circulate as a draft aggregation plan to the work group, like in early June. Like a month from now or so. That might mean like 2 meetings out. We would need something that looks like that.
Your Honor.
Just a second, Jeff. You've been waiting so patiently with your hand up. And I'm going to get to you, but just give me 1 second. It sounds like we have a general consensus, although we're going to have to wait for confirmation from staff on enrollment. And I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to, tell me otherwise in a moment. But that is, I don't know if we're calling it option 3 or the Potomac Edison Montgomery County enrollment proposal or what we're calling it now. I've called it a million different things. In a filing from, let's see, from I think March 25th, Potomac Edison submitted to everyone a description of that, and there was a little bit of back and forth as to, what happens at the utility, what happens in the CCA. So some of the legwork has already been done on the process that Phil is asking be done. So and be put in writing. So I guess at this point, we're going to be waiting to hear from Montgomery County, and I would ask Montgomery County to reach out to the utilities, schedule a meeting if there's more information needed on how those things will work together. But does anybody want to weigh in on your position on something other than the Potomac Edison Montgomery County enrollment proposal or option 3 or whatever we've been discussing? Okay. Staff, I will expect for you to send us something by the close of business today, just on staff's official position. Okay, go ahead, Jeff Trout. Thank you for being so patient.
Oh, you're very welcome, Your Honor. And I think you've largely answered the question that bothered me for the last 20 minutes, which was I didn't understand what staff's homework assignment to the utilities was. But if staff's homework assignment to the utilities is to do a skeletal process write-up of what the back and forth between the CCA and the utilities would be under what has, as you said, been called several different names. Let's call it, if everyone is agreeable, let's call it the FTP option. Staff actually labeled it as that in some of their documents, and it's shorter than any of the other names. So anyway, if our job between now and the next meeting 2 weeks from now is to do a write-up of what the back and forth would be for that piece of the CCA processes, that's fine, especially since we've already done it. But if we have some sort of larger homework assignment, like do a procedural outline of how the CCA process is going to work from birth to grave, and deliver that 2 weeks from now, I think we need to talk about that a little bit more.
I see Phil's hand is raised. I was muted. I see Phil's hand is raised, but I just pulled up and I hope I'm sharing something that PE submitted on March 25th, which has a little bit of, I think, what Phil was talking about. So there's the start. But I think you're right. I think this is at the point where we need to start getting something from the county, but I'll go ahead and let Phil talk.
Every time the proposal screen changes, moves my mute button around. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just to so I think Jeff was asking, we're not asking the utilities to talk about the CCA aggregation plan approval. That's for the counties to develop that. If you look at our bullets, so the first two is we need, when I say finalize billing and enrollment procedures there, we just need, I mean, I think we've documented a lot of the FTP option, and some of the other options, but I don't know that we have written down a similar level of detail on what's going to happen with the transition from SOS customers. There's probably some things we need to figure out about what's actually going to happen with the uncollected costs that are currently residing for recovery with the SOS admin charge. These are all things, if you sort of go back and look at the various agendas, we've touched on these. And I think folks, said, oh, that's important. But we may need to sort of document like what's going to happen. And again, the reason we need to do this, other than it's important to have a nice document that describes everything, is I think it's way more effective to write regulations when everyone has like a common procedure that everybody knows what it means and what's expected. You're not building into your regs something that isn't already been well described in your document. So, the utilities are going to have a lot to do to sort of implement the transition itself. Sounds like billing, which we assumed was going to be straightforward because we're just following standard billing. Maybe that's, if there's rules about that, maybe those are real simple rules, but we should at least put into this common document something that says, and billing for the CCA will follow standard retail choice. CCA has to EDI test like everybody else, and et cetera, et cetera. That's, if they're using a retail supplier, that's a no-brainer. But if they're not using a retail supplier, then we need to maybe lay out some of those details. So that's kind of but Jeff, we're not suggesting that the utility needs to cover anything that talks about how the CCA is to be originated. That is for the county. And then when talking to Robbie, I think Robbie was saying, hey, this isn't just about the utilities. And he's right. The CCA is going to have things that they have to sort of commit to doing. Like, we're going to get this list from you and we're going to scrub it. And here's how we're going to scrub it. And so we'll need rules that sort of cover the requirements, because there's a couple of folks that have raised a lot of concern about how that scrubbing process will occur and whether or not it's a permanent scrub or it's going to be re-scrubbed or that sort of thing. So I think that's a process that the utilities have a lot, to worry about on, because they have some requirements to meet and also want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with anything else. And obviously the CCA, this is going to describe how they're going to interact with the utility for the purpose not only of ongoing enrollments, which I think we've covered the last couple of weeks pretty thoroughly, but also what happens, during the month of October 24, when there's a lot of things going on, starting in maybe as early as August or a little earlier, and then are going to proceed through to the end of October, when by then hopefully all of the customers will have been transitioned who are correctly eligible. There's just a lot that needs to be described about that. And what I'm saying is I think we need rules to just cover much of that. So that's, sorry I'm being long-winded again, but that's kind of what. It's not the utility has to describe the aggregation plan. That's for the county. But all of the operations between the utility and the county, including billing, the transition, and then ongoing enrollment, have to be described in a document so we can base our rules on that document. So that's important. And Judge Grace, one thing, staff, if we're gonna respond to you, we're gonna need more time than today, because one of the things we want to make sure we have examined completely is that if we've been trying to address all of the different technical concerns we have about all three of these options. If we're going to make sure we've addressed everything with option or the FTP approach, we're going to want to develop that position and also make sure that if there are any concerns we have about how that's implemented, we've picked that up. So, we could come back to you and say, all right, we're going to go ahead with this, but there's a number of things we have concerns about. We could probably give that to you today. But if there are disagreements about the implementation of it, we won't have time to cover all of those details by the end of the day. That's just not where we are right now. So I want to manage expectations on what we can get back to you on.
I understand what you're saying, Phil, but we have certain deadlines, and all of the other folks were able to meet those deadlines in preparation for today's meeting. And there's been no new information at today's meeting. So I will expect staff to reply timely to what its position is on enrollment. Did the utilities have any questions about what Phil just said?
Unfortunately, yes, Your Honor. Our business people do not understand what they're being asked to do between now and the next meeting. What I think I heard staff say was that only that, except for things that are purely internal to the CCA, between now and the 24th, the utilities have now been tasked with doing a complete process design for the functioning of the CCA, its interactions with the utilities and with customers, and delivering that at the next meeting. First of all, I think a lot of that is something that the CCA is at least as an important stakeholder and a voice as the utilities, and we would want to interact with the county as the creator of the CCA in formulating any sort of straw proposal, number one. And number two, 2 weeks to do this, especially when we just spent 8 weeks fighting over whether the CCA was going to be used as a launching pad for bringing instant connects to Maryland. 2 weeks is not a reasonable time frame for us to develop what still sounds to me like a birth to grave straw man set of processes for the CCA.
Phil, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking for either. And then there's also some comments from Taylor Beckham. Taylor, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. I'm sorry. I'm having issues talking. I agree with Jeff's points, but I don't want to derail the conversation, so that's why I just threw them in the chat. But I think there's still some topics that we were expecting to discuss, and I don't know if we are thinking that we would discuss them in the course of putting together the regulations. Still not totally sure what exactly the ask is. But for instance, I'm just throwing out there the POR rate and uncollectibles, current uncollectibles that would be in the SOS admin charge. I think there were just some things that we wanted to, or we thought this group would be considering. And I just am wondering if we're still going to be doing that, because I think those are key issues that we need to resolve / consider when it comes to the CCA.
Part of what's driving me and kind of pushing the timeline a little bit is because there are a lot of other issues and ones that we've identified and you just identified that we need to talk about.
Okay, that's understood. Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you about where we're going to be going in the next few weeks, the next few meetings. I think we're going to need something from the county letting us know what the county is thinking about, how they would like to see this work. And then I think the county needs to meet with the utilities to see if there are any kinks in that system or in what they're asking for and what they're required, how that would mesh with the back and forth with the utilities. I'm sure staff would like to be in on those meetings. And I'm sorry, Lori, I see your hand raised. Go ahead, Lori McGilvray.
Oh, no, thank you, Judge Grace. Why don't you finish where you're going? I had a more kind of 30,000 foot question about the schedule.
Okay. I guess my question is for Montgomery County. Where are you on kind of deciding what type of model you want to use or what your plan is? Are you anywhere near to being able to tell us, like some of your choices on how you would like to proceed?
I'm not sure what the question is, Judge Grace. I mean, I think we've been clear that we expect we would use a retail supplier or suppliers in the initial stages of the CCA.
Okay. Have you looked at some of the what some of the other states have done?
We've looked at, yes, we've looked at something of what other states have done. We're not, yeah.
And based on that, do you have an idea of how you would like Maryland to look, Montgomery County to look?
I don't understand the question. I mean, we would presume to use retail suppliers that operate in Maryland to procure an electricity supply to offer to the CCA customers. So I don't know what you mean about the way we'd like this to look.
Okay. Lori, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. This may take us a bit off topic, but so I'm just trying to understand where the final goal post is and what will be the product of our work. So you may have said at the outset some months ago what you believe the timeline for having draft regulations to the commission, what that needs to be. My recollection, it's in the November, December timeframe of this year, which would track with the schedule that Phil provided that has us kind of finishing the last topic in November. So I just want to be sure that, you know, the pacing, since we have spent 8 weeks on one topic, that we're using our time wisely and that we don't kind of run out of time and have unfinished topics that we haven't discussed. So that's question one, is sort of like, when do we have to be done? And then my second question is, well, what's the product of our discussions? Is it just notes? Is there some kind of work group report to the commission flagging how we are recommending issues be addressed? And then I guess finally, I don't know the administrative procedures in Maryland for rulemaking and whether or not there's a point at which we say we're done as a work group and anything having to do with drafting regulations is behind closed doors, because that's an internal process. So that's a question of just like, how does that work? So it's time frame, it's what's the product of our work, and how do we transition from these discussions to the actual drafting of regulations, and will we get to see anything preliminary, or do we just wait until they're publicly available?
So Your Honor, I can speak to that because I'm very familiar with these processes. The drafting of the regulations, the submission of them to the commission, the hearing or hearings on them in front of the commission, those are all very much collaborative, stakeholder-driven work group processes. So everybody who's involved now and who wants to remain involved is going to have a seat at the table and a voice as we go forward and turn our discussions ultimately into proposed rules. So that's the first thing. And the timeline, yeah, I agree that trying to get something to the commission by November of this year would be good, because there's a lot that has to happen after the initial hearing at the commission before final rules become final rules. And I'm trying to think what else was involved in your question, Lori. Did that answer your concern?
Yeah, just is there some kind of product that's the result of our work?
Yes,
Yeah, well,
we're,
there'll be,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to suggest that we do what most other work groups do, which is we have a set of draft regulations and we attach to the front of that a work group report where we explain why we're proposing what we're proposing. And to the extent that not everything in the draft regulations is agreed to by all parties, we lay out what the different positions of the different parties are on the things where we disagree. And again, you have a lot of people involved in this process from the utilities, but not just from the utilities. You have staff and People's Council, and you have AOBA, you have all the retail suppliers, and the county, for that matter, is very experienced with these kinds of processes too. So there's a lot of folks who know how to make this work and know how to make the process run. And the trick is getting the substance pulled together, and assuming we don't have another hiccup like the one we just had for the last 2 months, where we spend a lot of time on one issue, we can get this done.
We can. I agree with everything that Jeff said. It's going to be tight, and so we may be going to weekly meetings, but if we can do a lot of work in the off weeks like we have been doing, we might not have to do that. So we will be submitting a work group report, and that's something that I'm already working on pretty much every week. And so, for instance, on the issue that we decided today, it will lay out some of the options that we considered, and it will state that there's a general consensus as to the FTP, if I can remember to call it that. And then there were specific comments submitted by AOBA and Montgomery County, and then we'll see what we get from staff. You know, I guess reserving issues or stating issues that are outside of that general consensus. And so those will be included on this subject matter. And so all of the subjects that we have been discussed will be just kind of highlighted in the report, just generally. And then we, as a group, are tasked with drafting the regs and getting them to the commission. And we can do it, but it's time consuming. And then the commission has hearings on that. And it takes some time for them to you know, make their changes and to make their decisions and push it through. Or is your question answered?
Yes,
Lauren?
thank you. That was extremely helpful.
Okay. I've been trying to pull up the previous schedule with some of the previous lists of issues to see if there was something that we could discuss at the next, that we could prepare and discuss at the next meeting, another issue that we haven't discussed yet, to give the utilities and Montgomery County time to meet and, I guess, with staff and come up with a process, because it seems like nobody, you know, it seems like nobody wants to submit a straw man on how this should work, or where it's laborious, or you know, so I'm not sure where to go at this point. Phil, you raised your hand first, and then Leah.
You know, and Taylor just mentioned this, but one of the items for October is uncollected revenue issues. So we probably could generically talk about this, because about what should be done with the uncollected SOS revenue that is normally to be recovered through the SOS administrative charge. I think there is, even in the law, some discussion of that the commission can determine a portion of that to be sort of set aside from collection through the admin. I don't know if it talks about specifically, but there may be some need to allocate a portion of that to sort of start the CCA with some amount of uncollected revenue to be recovered. So that's like it may interact with some other things like consumer protection or what have you, but we may be able to talk about that if folks, you know, can get some thoughts about how that should work. I mean, I think the options look like you don't do anything. You transfer an amount that's proportional to sales revenue from you know, the two jurisdictions in PEPCO and the jurisdiction, well, the you know, however it would work out from each of the utilities. We potentially could talk about that. It's sort of isolated. It's policy mostly, but it might be something to chew on for a little bit until we have the ability to move forward on strawman.
So did I just hear staff say that staff is proposing to take money collected from SOS customers for SOS service and use it for the CCA? Take SOS monies and give it to a retail supplier?
Perhaps I misspoke there. We're talking about the sort of existing uncollected SOS revenue that is currently recovered through the admin charge. And I think there's actually something in the legislation that addresses. We've already talked about this once or twice, I think, but I don't know that we ever delved into specifics. But No one's talking about taking SOS money and giving it to the supplier. What we're talking about is there a need to allocate a portion of the uncollected expense that is associated with the historic SOS uncollected revenue in Montgomery County portion? Is there a need to allocate that and have that be recovered on an ongoing basis after the transition through whatever means by which the uncollected costs associated with the CCA are collected?
So I don't understand what an uncollected SOS cost is.
So if you bill an SOS customer, they don't pay their bill, the distribution portion of that goes into utilities distribution uncollected expense, however that's covered. But the SOS administrative charge incorporates a portion that is intended to recover uncollected costs. And that revenue that's uncollected from SOS is accounted for separately as the commodity revenue by each utility.
Oh, okay. So you're saying that the utilities wind up keeping the SOS uncollectibles, but that a portion of, again, monies that we haven't collected will nonetheless be allocated from SOS monies that are collected and paid to the CCA somehow. I'm not following this, but it sounds like sounds like something that needs to be spelled out in detail as to what staff's proposal is before we can react in more detail than the consternation that I'm feeling right now.
Let me try one more time. Some customers don't pay their bills, and some of those customers are SOS customers. The utilities account for uncollected SOS commodity distinctly from the other forms of revenue, the transmission revenue, the distribution revenue. Maybe with PE, there's a mixture in the transmission and distribution. You don't have separate transmission rates, which I don't recall at the moment. But for a company that has SOS service, there's a portion of the SOS revenue that is not recovered because customers didn't pay that bill and then left the system, and that amount is written off. So that's an uncollectible expense that's associated with the SOS commodity. There is sort of a historic amount of that is accounted for and collected by applying an SOS administrative charge to the SOS rate. That the SOS admin charge includes a component to recover the cost of uncollected revenue. So once and let's take Pepco as the example, when half of the SOS sales is transferred to the SOS accounts are transferred to the CCA, the historic uncollected costs will not have yet been recovered. It's sort of a rolling forward amount. And there will only be half of the SOS revenue over which to recover the uncollected costs that are historically in existence. So you follow me? This is not new. We already talked about this at least once.
Well, I must have missed the meeting where we talked about this, and I'm following you up to the point where there's a pot of money that is going to get transferred, and it sounds like it's going to get transferred from money that the utilities are holding to pay for SOS, and it's going to get transferred to a retail supplier that has been retained to be the CCA. And if that's not what you're doing, just say that's not what you're doing.
I don't think anyone's transferring money that is being held. I think we're talking about there's an existing level of uncollected expense that gets matched up against revenue going forward. Now, hopefully that's small, but I'm not sure what scale that looks like, especially post-COVID when there might be a lot of uncollected revenue that's gonna be imposed on the utilities or that's gonna be recovered because it hasn't been written off just yet because folks weren't being disconnected during the COVID period. That probably makes it worse, but I don't know if that's by 2024, it's gonna be a significant problem. But there's uncollected expense that hasn't been recovered. The utilities account for that, and it looks like something that they need to set against the uncollected revenue or uncollected admin charge. So that's what I'm talking about. Not that we're going to collect money from SOS customers and siphon off a portion of the SOS admin charge to the CCA. We're talking about transferring an expense for recovery, probably within something like the POR discount rate at the start of the transition period. I swear we've talked about that.
Does everybody see Taylor Beckham's, she's on my same wavelength, comment, I guess it's the third to last comment, in the chat box. Seems like this is a topic that is ripe for discussion. If the judge thinks it's appropriate to discuss at the next meeting, can staff submit its proposal and everyone will be prepared to respond in 2 weeks? That sounds great. What I'm sharing is a document from staff from November, talking about where we should be through March 1st. And we are, I think we're here. And I think what staff was talking about was what we should do on March 1st meeting, action plan to implement. So we're a little bit behind, but so I'm happy.
This is what we had scheduled for October, but we can, if we have space in the schedule, we can begin talking about it next time.
Yeah, I think we should do that. I think that'd be great. I would ask staff, Phil, you said earlier that you had sent the county, or you thought you had sent the county, or you would send the county information on what's happening, what the more specifics of the plans used in other states. You mentioned Ohio. If you could go ahead and send that to the county so they can start thinking about.
Yeah, Stan, did we already send that to you, Stan, the Ohio plans?
I don't recall, Phil, I can check.
Okay, let me know if you don't have it, we'll send it.
And just copy everyone, because people are going to need to start thinking about it. And I'll ask the utilities if they'll send Montgomery County a copy of their, I don't know what would be useful, their supplier tariffs, or if there's something that you send to a new supplier indicating how things work at the utility, if there's something that you can send to Montgomery County and copy everybody else, so that we can move forward with kind of being more specific on how this is going to work, that would be great. So in the background, let's all be working on that. But in for the next meeting, let's see, staff, if you can submit something in writing. Yeah, the Ohio plan to the group. Thanks, Taylor. But on the SOS issue, the POR rate, if staff could submit something for us to talk about, and if everybody can be ready and have talked to your folks about your position on this issue and what you would like to see happen, we can have a more detailed discussion on this at the next meeting. I've got hands raised. Let me get to that screen. Let's see. Looks like Jorge Aguilar is first.
Hey, thanks, Judge Grace. So one of the things, and I know I chatted that we should discuss the POR rate topic for the next call, but it seemed that Phil said it was scheduled for October. So I'm just checking in that we're not actually kind of jumping for something that was more urgent for the next call, if it's already on the schedule. So just checking on that, because I actually don't know what was next in like 2 weeks. So it seems like you made the recommendations to just skip whatever was next.
Well, there's no order. There's no order that we need to go in for these things. There, the things that we needed to get nailed down right at the beginning, that staff identified, we've already done those. So if I'm hoping you guys can see my screen, there's a whole bunch of other issues, and then there's the requirements from the legislation that we're gonna have to go through, but staff is right, we need to have a little more detail of how the rules of engagement of how this is likely to work, and it doesn't seem like we have the time to do that before the next meeting, so that's why I'm asking that that be worked on in the background. And it seems like parties are eager to discuss this issue, and so it doesn't matter if it's in October or if we discuss it now.
There
Robbie,
seemed to be a couple individuals who were most interested in it. So that's why I'm really deferring, I would say, to Phil. There probably should be some order in terms of prioritization, but I don't know enough to recommend something. So that's just, I was just pausing for that moment, but totally, if that's the way to go, then that seems right, Judge.
Okay, thank you. Robbie Atkins, you were next.
Yeah, real quick. We were going to request from staff to provide to us in writing what it is they specifically want from us by the next meeting, so we're not confused. If we can get that.
Phil, your hand's raised too.
Yeah, so Judge Grace, I think what we want to keep in mind is if we are trying to hit a target for having a rulemaking in front of the commission pretty far in advance of so I think that means folks were observing that we sort of have the draft rules kind of put together by November-ish. We're gonna need to, like, the near-term decision-making process, and the reason why the development of the aggregation plan is first is because we sort of need to know that the county can sort of begin their planning process for whatever they have to do internally, because I think they have to charter it and pass some local legislation and that sort of thing, and then obviously they'll need to work on procurement. So we need to give them plenty of time to do all the internal things. So we need to give them some pretty early feedback on here's when you'll need to bring your plan to the commission, and here's how long it's going to take the commission to rule on your plan. So that's why that's first in terms of dealing with, and also because I kind of think that won't be super hard to do. The rulemaking may not be hard, but it's the list of items that the legislation requires to be placed in regulation is extensive. And so the sooner we start drafting rules, the sooner we can get through that process, which may be consensus or may not. And, it often takes longer if it's not consensus. So that's why it's like next step really should be knowing what we're going to write the rules to describe. And that's, I think, what Robbie's just asking us to put in writing. But I mean, I'm not asking you write the draft rules to implement this, because that's not what we were expecting to do. But if the utilities, want certain requirements to be placed on the CCA in terms of all of the things we talked about since April, or since January, really. We need a document to work from to draft those rules. Like, as a group, we need that. And that's important. And if that takes too long, if we can't get something moving in the next couple of weeks, we won't get the rules drafting process started until after July, and then that just pushes us further into the end of the year to get that completed. So that's I think near term. If we have nothing to do where we can't begin sort of looking at a draft in 2 weeks for this kind of business plan that I'm talking about, something that's going to lay out the expectations and requirements of each of the parties, then we could start talking about what policy should be used to split up any pre-existing uncollected costs that exist now or will exist at the time that the SOS transfer to CCA occurs. That's a policy discussion. We probably need to know some things like, well, how much is projected to be in place at that point? How much is in there now? So we can work on that. It's as a policy matter, it might be easy to say, all right, well, the Montgomery County residents should, on an average basis, reflect, they should, the amount of expense that gets allocated to the CCA should reflect something like, their proportion of the existing amount. And then we can argue about what the proportion should be. I mean, that's a discussion that's not too hard to have, but when we delve into the details, we're probably going to want to know, well, how big is it? Is it going to change between now and then? And, is it going to create any issues, with the utility accounting or with, the way it gets transferred or anything like that. So that could get lengthy, and that's why it's sort of towards the end after some other things that are more important. But if we don't have the ability to begin looking at either the draft straw man for the aggregation plan or begin to see what, like the document that describes how all this is going to work, cradle to grave, as Jeff was saying, then, we should either, fill that with something that we can begin working on. But I don't know that we can knock that out in one meeting. So I don't know we can knock out, the SOS allocation issue in one meeting, but that's something that's sort of isolated that might not interfere with everything else that we could spend some time on. But we shouldn't dive into that because we really need to get working on the aggregation plan and the regs, but there's some legwork that needs to be done to get there. So
I think the problem is, one, I'm not sure that it's clear what level of detail you want in the aggregation plan. And so I think that's why Robbie Atkins was asking that you put it in writing what you're looking for from the utility. I also heard the utility say that, or at least one utility say, that they don't think that this is, their duty because they, need more information from Montgomery County. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to come up with a information share so that we can all have the information that we need to go forward with a more detailed plan, because I agree with you that we need that now, but it doesn't seem like it's something that anybody feels qualified to do right now. So I was trying to identify things that could be shared as an information share so that we could get there. Unless staff is willing to prepare a straw man, it might be just as easy as writing out what exactly it is you're looking for.
Maybe we should just talk about like what, because we could write up. I'm going to write down what I just said about what we need. But if nobody understood what I just said, we should probably just talk about what we're looking for. So I think we need to do that because otherwise we're going to write this up, we'll send it out, and then they'll say we don't understand this.
Yeah. And can you start with why you think that this needs to come from the utilities right now? I guess I don't understand why you're asking the utilities for this.
All right. So the enrollment and billing processes are something that the utilities control. So it's their system. The timing of issues, what is sent, the format, those are all utility business processes. Is that true? Does that folks agree to that idea? Okay, I'll keep going.
So how we enroll suppliers today, yeah, we have processes for those. And we're not reinventing those.
Right. How are you going to transition? Jeff, how is PE going to transition the 32,000 customers to the CCA in October of 24?
So maybe the way to handle this and the way to weave together what you've been asking for a while now on this call and what Judge Grace just suggested is for staff to make a list of the steps that it believes need to occur, and then the utilities in consultation with the county can get back with how we think each step should work with respect to the steps that are joint utility county interactions. And with respect to the ones that are strictly going to be CCA functions, I think the county will need a bit more time to work on those. but they could be working on those. But if you tell us what this list of steps is that you want us to give you all the detail on, we can start doing it. It's just having us design the thing from beginning to end, I think is not consistent with how this work group process was set up or has functioned up to now, and is not going to lead to the optimal result, because we are just a piece of this and not the most, frankly, not the most important piece.
I don't think we can do that because we don't know your system. I mean, we spent weeks trying to understand your system and ran into some trouble there. So, I mean, this is a process that your folks should be familiar with. Yes, you may have to design this in concert with this, the folks from the county. I don't think staff can design this for you because we're not going to be able to speak to the technical specifications or the process itself. We don't even have the vocabulary typically unless we've spent some time digging in and understanding. So, I mean, is it so far out of the realm of understanding? So we spent weeks talking about what the transition was going to look like. I don't know that folks can understand that, but I mean, there's some documents out that are already out there that when we sort of had meeting agendas and had various preparations, but I don't think the staff folks can do anything other than like describe something extremely generically, like you're going to send data to the utility or to the CCA. We don't know when you're going to send it. We don't know when the CCA wants it. We don't know how often you can send it. We don't know the format you want to send it in.
Right. Those are all the details that we can fill in. But step one the utility send a bunch of data to the CCA. If that's it, then that's the step one in the straw man. Give us a list of all the steps that you want us to tell you how they're going to work, and we can start fleshing that out with the county to the extent that there's steps that are utility CCA interactions. And to the extent that they're pure CCA functions, that's between you and the county, but I would think the county would want you to make a list again of the steps you want them to flesh out. And then, we can flesh out, we can
staff
either
really have
put on can I finish, Phil? We can either put in our proposal based on our system, or put in a straw man based on conversations with the county, how each step would work. But we need to know what are the list of steps you are assigning us to design.
Folks, I'm sharing a document that was prepared by Potomac Edison on the enrollment issue, that small enrollment issue of that we got stuck on. And there's steps laid out. Utility will generate a report list to be posted to an FTP. And we discussed, based on this document, we discussed the back and forth, and we came up with later on, we came up with a timeline on how this would work. Is what staff's asking for something from the utility and Montgomery County stating how the communication will work between the utility and Montgomery County starting prior to the October start date of the CCA, starting with, how the county is going to get the list of customers and that sort of thing in this kind of format?
I mean, that sounds. I'm trying to grasp what you have on the screen is the.
It's just a small portion of.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's what it looks like. So, but just think of it this way: what we're trying to get to is like how we're going to draft regulations that are going to, like, that we need, according to the list of things we need regulations for. And typically, if you're writing regulations and everybody understands, like if there's something that you're just codifying into regulations that everybody already does, that's, I'm not going to say easy, but it's much simpler to do that than trying to devise a new process and devise the regulations as you're going through development of the process. So I think we just spent the last couple of weeks, months really working through how enrollment and billing are going to work during the operation of the CCA, and from the point where we transition from SOS to the CCA, and then what happens after that. So I think what I had in mind is that the parties that were actually going to be interacting with each other, having gone through this level of discussion, would be able to kind of sit down and say, all right, well, what are you going to do and what are we going to do and when is this going to happen? And I mean, staff is happy to sort of assist with that, but we really can't originate and design that process because we don't know what the county wants when they want to do things, what time things are. And we don't know what the utilities timing is for how fast they can process things. We have to ask, like, well, how many enrollments can you handle in a particular day? Well, we sort of know that that's 10,000 because we asked that question. But it seems far simpler for the utilities in the county to sit together and say, all right, we've generally worked out how this is going to work. Let's get into specifics and then just write down that procedure. So we're not trying to direct any particular outcome here. It sounds like we've already talked around it at a pretty high level, but when it comes to documenting how this process is going to work, I kind of think that the folks who are actually going to do it be the ones to make that document. We're not. Jeff seems to be concerned that we're directing something, but I mean, this isn't something that staff can sort of develop, as fast as folks on your end that are actually going to be, thinking about, well, how are we going to implement this? What people do we have in place? How are we going to do this? Let's see what the county wants when they want it. I mean, the only thing we could possibly do is probably documents that you already have, because I think we've used some of these issues. There's some position issue papers that are out there, but I mean that's really the role of the folks who are proficient and expert in the types of things that are going to be done in order to achieve this. So if folks are unwilling to proceed with that, I mean, we'll give it a shot, but there's no way we're going to be able to move as fast as what we think the experts can do. So we don't have the ability to commit to the timetable you're looking for.
I agree with you, Phil. That explanation makes much more sense to me. Jeff, what documents do you have that you could send to Montgomery County to help them prepare for having this conversation with the utilities? The tariff, I mean, there's the regs out there for suppliers. I'm not sure. I understand now what I see you, Leah Gibbons. I see that you raise your hand. I understand what staff is asking for a little bit better. Go ahead, Leah.
Well, I mean, I'm listening very carefully to the conversation, and I think it feels like there's a little bit of frustration. And so I just wanted to propose an idea. There's plenty of people on this call, I think, that participated in our supplier consolidated billing work groups. It's hard for us to get that experience out of our minds. Probably it went on for a long time, but there was something that we did at the beginning of that process with business processes, and I mean, I'm thinking more visually. I'm wondering if there isn't a way that we could potentially, try to flesh out the process flow by doing it in a more visual way rather than these lists of bullets. I mean, I was looking at the screenshot that you just had up on the screen, Judge, and I can see how it's sort of like trying to bulletize the different steps. But I mean, I don't know about others. For me, I'm a visual person, and I find that stuff to be really helpful. Not to make it a more grueling or painful process, but we seem to be struggling with how to start and where to begin. And so I'm just throwing it out there as a potential idea, as a way to get us all going. Is, Jeff, you may remember this too, like the swim lane documents where we actually show, the utility, the county, the customer, the suppliers, and you actually can visually show how do the process flows work? What does the billing look like? What does the enrollment? Where does the information flow? And it just gives maybe everybody a little bit better or different way to sort of get our arms around what is it we're trying to describe and capture. So I don't have like a grand scheme on how do we get that started, but I just thought maybe it's another idea to throw out to maybe help get us over a hurdle and figure out how to begin. So I just wanted to offer that as a suggestion.
So I do remember that process, Leah, and I remember spending months on those business flow processing documents. So the idea that
It
we're gonna,
did.
the idea that we're gonna cut, and I also remember that we started with stuff, that we started with straw men from staff.
We did.
So, that's, and apparently we're not gonna start with a straw man from staff, and we're not gonna have months to do this. We're gonna have 2 weeks.
No, we're not,
That's-
you're gonna have more than 2 weeks.
All right, good. Thank you, Your Honor. All right, basically what I have heard Phil say is that we have to come up with, we in the county need to come up with the list of steps of all of the interactions, and then the county needs to fill in all of the steps that are theirs. And so we create the straw man, and then circulate it around, and staff will do whatever staff is going to do with it after we have gone to the trouble of creating it to the utilities and the county satisfaction. And if that's the assignment from the work group, then I guess that's what is going to happen. But we'll be designing something that will be that will fit the CCA's needs, the county's needs, and the utilities systems and existing processes, and we will take as our starting point, and we can share with the county to the extent that they don't already have it, our retail tariffs relating to retail choice and our processes with respect to interactions with retail suppliers. So we won't be reinventing the wheel. I'm still frustrated with the idea that we have to come up with all of the steps for the launching of the CCA, but if staff can or won't, then we will.
Let me just, Jeff, this is Kenny Albert. My understanding, the very purpose, typically you get rulemaking, you get staff come up with something sort of, and then you, on the back end, you backload input from the industry. I mean, my understanding is that the virtue of the whole work group approach is precisely what you seem to be resisting, which is to get the utilities and the other interested parties to put out the proposal in the first instance. So rather than having you in a responsive mode where staff has to sit back and sort of guess at what the industry, what the utility wants and what the customers want, the utility and the customers in a work group are right there at the table. And so it's frankly to their advantage to take this opportunity rather than, it's not a burden we're trying to put on people. It's frankly an opportunity to get the input from the people who are going to have the most significant say when the commission actually rules on this.
That's fair enough. And we'll lead the meetings going forward in the discussions of the straw man that we develop.
So I've got 2 computers working right now. I'm trying to locate information from some of the other states, and part of the reason why staff has been asked to lead up until this point is because staff has some of the resources that at its disposal that others would have to take some time to look for. I see that Bev has asked for anything that Ohio has produced, plan or regulations or something, and sounds like staff has either sent that out before or has access to that. So I would again ask for staff to go ahead and send that to all the parties. I was not able to find it just now as we were having the discussion. It sounds like Jeff Trout on behalf of PE is willing to work with Montgomery County to come up with something, and that it may take some time. The Exelon Utilities, are you willing to go in on that and try to create something?
I think we're fine with, we'll work with PE. Not to speak for everyone, but we didn't all raise our hands. So
Okay. Okay. So I think at this point, we'll, look in the upcoming weeks, not in 1 week or 2 weeks, but in the upcoming weeks, for the utilities to get together with Montgomery County, to try to figure out between the two of you how the system works now, what's easiest for the utilities to make work for this based on what we have now, and taking into account what Montgomery County decides, and to at some point get a straw man to us. But obviously that's not going to be done before the next meeting. So we've already identified a topic to discuss, maybe out of order, for the next meeting. So I would ask for staff to go ahead and send something out for discussion for that in the next week, so that parties can talk it over amongst themselves and be ready to discuss that more thoroughly at the next meeting. Let's see. And anything that you all can share with the group, staff sharing what it has from some of the other states as an example, and utilities sharing with the group if you think it would be useful, like its current tariffs, or whatever else you think might be useful to make folks ready for the discussion of your straw man. That would be great. And does it, Phil?
Yeah, and I don't know if we still have the retail suppliers on the call that are engaged in some of the other states, but if folks know of a aggregation plan that they participate in, that's a public document that shows, examples. We've talked to the folks in Ohio, and they gave us a link to one of the cities that had done a recent aggregation plan, like in the last year or two. But we know there's just, there's stuff going on in a number of other states. So if there are any of the retail suppliers that either know because they participated and they're able to point us at the public documents, probably a lot more than just one that we could look at. Hopefully all look the same, but potentially some of the retail supplier folks that are on the call sometimes may be able to help out with pointing us at links to just proceedings that have that stuff in it. So I think we probably have some files, but I think we even better have a link to the Ohio PUC website with the proceeding that developed that. So I think we got to dig that out. If we didn't already send it, we'll find the email and then circulate that link, which gives you not only the aggregation plan itself, but hopefully all the documents in that docket as well. But if there are other dockets in other states like Massachusetts or some of the other states that have done this, and folks have knowledge of that's probably just as good, and it would be great to have a couple different things to compare.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Does everybody know what they're supposed to be doing? Okay, staff, I'm expecting two things from you. One is your position on enrollment, and two is something for us to discuss at the next meeting. And then the utilities in Montgomery County, we're asking that you all meet to discuss starting to make a straw man for a plan to get this whole thing together. And I love an illustrated, I love the suggestion for an illustrated, like a plan that's easy to follow that might have been done in some of the other work groups. So if you want to send around You know, what that might look like, that'd be useful too, but, and we have what's going to happen at the next meeting, and then we have what's going to happen in some meeting to come, once Montgomery County and the utilities work on their plan. I see you, Jeff. What's up?
So the process documents from Supplier Consolidated Billing, I remember them being there being two of them, and they being 50 or 60 pages each.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Be careful what you wish for, Your Honor.
Never mind. I just didn't know what type of like illustrated or like, I didn't know what to picture.
If we can create a flow chart of a few pages, that probably won't be where we start, but if we can at some point develop I agree that would be a very helpful tool.
Okay, great. I'm glad you've been involved in more than one working group, I guess. It'll make things easier for us. Sorry about your luck though. Go ahead, Phil.
So just for planning purposes, if we maybe have a feel for what our schedule looks like, it would probably be good to understand. So that the next thing we're going to work on after we sort of deal with the next meeting is the draft aggregation plan and the procedural schedule for approving the aggregation plan. So those are things we need from the county folks. I don't want to put anybody on the spot right now, but probably the earliest we would want to look at that is the meeting after the next one, which you know, I guess maybe, I don't know if that's 3 weeks or 4 weeks out.
So our next meeting is May 24th, and you're going to take care of something for us to discuss for that. And then the meeting after that will be June 7th. And at the June 7th meeting, that's the one that will start at 10. But I think I interrupted you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just trying to pull up my calendar here to just make sure. So in terms of, based on the schedule we sent out, so on the 24th, we're going to talk about the SOS uncollected costs and potential allocation of those to this DCA. So that, did you say the meeting after that is the 31st or June 7th?
June 7th.
Okay, so on June 7th, will the county be able to give us a draft aggregation plan or a straw man for that, and or have some thoughts about how fast we're going to need to have that for the procedural schedule? So those are that's the thing we would want to talk about next. So I guess I'm sort of asking the county, so that's a month out about. So in that time, we would maybe need the county to give us something that looks like a straw man for their aggregation plan, and maybe a straw man of their thoughts of how quickly they would want that procedural schedule to turn around at the commission. And we may need to talk about that for only one meeting, or we may need to take that to the meeting of June 21st, if that's the next one. So that's kind of for the county to think about, but I think maybe if we're penciling in what we're going to do after the meeting on the 26th, the June 7th meeting, we'd be talking about that, and we would need to have that handy probably the week beforehand if we're going to be able to talk about that. And depending on how much time we want to allocate for addressing the aggregation plan, then the end game for that would be, we would be able to tell the county, okay, this looks like a pretty good draft aggregation plan. You guys can go off and write your aggregation plan and whatever you need to do to get that in place, using this as a model, and we're all okay with that. So hopefully we can do that no later than, say, the 21st, which then takes us out to July 5th, which might be a not great week for a lot of folks if people are expecting to do something with the Independence Day holiday. So, Your Honor, I don't know if you want to pick that one to the 12th or something, but July 5th, or whenever that meeting is going to occur, that's when we would want to have something that looks like a pretty good written procedure as to how all this stuff is going to work, because that at the next thing we were going to want to do is draft regulations, and we would want to have that. So in terms of the dates, for deliverables, if we're going to try to talk about the aggregation plan first week of June on the 7th for that, and then if we're going to talk about drafting regulations, having a good solid business plan for all of this upon which to base those regulations, that's when we would need those, potentially, without setting that in stone right now at all. Just kind of wanted to make sure folks, see what folks thought about that.
The county?
We can certainly sketch something out. It will be a pencil sketch or a fine oil painting. I'm not sure, but we will have something sketched out. Yep. And we can keep people informed of the progress.
Okay.
Stan, do you understand what Phil's asking for?
Not entirely, but that's okay. I think this is a thing we can coordinate on, and we can provide our work in progress, and he can react, and other folks in the work group can react and say, "Oh, this is headed the right direction," or "No, we need more on this," and we'll keep working at it. I don't think I need to know, or we need to know, or I don't think he can describe for me any better than he already has a more detailed thing, and I think it's just going to have to be an iterative process. But I understand that we need to look. I'm as anxious as anybody to figure out what the hell we're doing with this program. So we want to work on it, and it'll be an iterative process.
All right. Well, Stan, we'll send you the filed aggregation plans that we have from Ohio, which sort of kind of show you what that commission approved, and whether or not our commission will need to approve the same things, different things, what have you. That gives you sort of like what one of those looks like, and it's not particularly complicated. It sort of just has a number of things about terms and conditions and rates and that sort of thing. So we'll send that to you, and then schedule a time to sort of talk through all of that. But ultimately, we want to be able to tell the county, this is what you should file, or what's going to be expected of the county when they make the filing, which I guess would happen sometime in the fall of 23. So the reason we're sort of addressing it early is so that you have plenty of time to work that into whatever you need to do internally. But the commission has to approve something like this. And so the examples that I think we're going to bring up are other jurisdictions that have approved plans and what that looks like when you need to file it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And of course, we'll have to reconcile it with the law in Montgomery County. But what you're saying makes perfect sense.
Okay. So we'll send that stuff over, dig that out this afternoon, send it to the group. I'm pretty sure we can find it. And then give us a call next week, and if you have questions about, what that looks like. And when we get to that meeting, then folks can hopefully have a chance to take a look at what you've come up with or thoughts you may have on what needs to be incorporated. And if people have other comments on it, that's when we can kind of deal with that. And hopefully that's a 2-meeting, thing to work out, because, we're typically doing is just at that point developing, a straw man of what it should look like to make sure we've covered all the finer points. And there's certainly opportunity to come back to that as you go through your process of procurement and signing up a supplier. So. All right, and then we'll have a couple of meetings and we can talk more about what we're going to need, the week of first week of July. And Your Honor, I don't know if you want to poll people to see what their vacation plans look like to make sure that the 5th is a good date to meet still, or if we want to push that a week. Either way.
I'm not going to move anything yet, because I think based on our pace at this point, that by that point we will be meeting every week instead of every other week. That's kind of what I have in the back of my head based on I think when we need to get these regulations rolling. So I'm going to leave it on there for now. And I'll take it off later, depending on if we're going to I don't want to mix everybody up and change things a million different times. So if at every week at that point, then it'd be very easy to skip that one. If we're not at every week, then we might just have to move it instead of skip one, because we're a little scrunched on time right now. Before everyone leaves, David Hoppick has been so wonderful to point us to the SOS uncollected costs to the CCA portion, which I'm going to try to pull up. Dang it, I have it on my screen, but it's not an option for sharing. Let's see. We're looking, I pulled up so everybody could take a look at it, 7-510.3, section P. Let me see. Wow, that won't pull up. Just 1 second.
While you're doing that, Judge, I know we probably don't have the right utility people on the call to ask the question of what the sort of ongoing or typical SOS uncollected cost looks like. But to the extent we need to understand, like, is there an issue with the scale of it, and does it change over time? You know, we might need to have people thinking about that. We'll try and write that up in the thing we send around about what we're going to ask people to talk about next time.
Yep, I was going to ask that because I know our people are not on the call. Thanks.
Right. Yeah, we'll like sort of write that up. And
so this is 7-510.3 P. This is the portion of the CCA statute that we're going to be talking about. Give everybody a moment, and then we can close for the day, unless anybody else has anything we need to discuss.
Your Honor, can I just maybe ask, when we shift to to the all-day meetings, so they'll start at 10 and they'll close at 4?
Yeah, I think so.
So I'm kind of, and maybe this is something for folks to think about for a while. Sometimes you really have to have a lot of material ready to go. And sometimes what we do is a little iterative. So I know that you can have an all-day meeting, but if you know, it's almost like I want to think about what, you know, conceivably we're going to be, what sort of work we'll be doing and what sort of tools will we need. Like if we're going to work on a combined document, and we're going to be like editing and wordsmithing on the fly, sometimes that will kind of work. But if we're sort of kind of talking about things, you know, there's an awful lot of this is where like the weekly meeting can be sometimes difficult, because much of the benefit you get from a work group is when you've had a chance to sort of absorb a document that somebody sent around, thinking about it. Maybe you're not like responding to a question that you haven't thought about before. So we go to weekly meetings, the ability to turn around sort of a response and then a proposal becomes a little harder to do. And at the same time, if we did have weekly meetings, then having weekly all-day meetings might become kind of difficult to develop enough material to actually productively work on. So there might be some benefit to sort of setting up maybe meetings that are shorter duration, but maybe like you meet 2 days during the week, you know, maybe 2 afternoons to give people time to sort of digest and come back to something rather than going all day. But that's just something to think about and digest. We can always, once we see what work needs to be done at each going forward meeting, we may be able to decide the best approach to solving the problem and working through it.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely do.
yeah.
But
I'll add also, keep in mind, some of us are also on multiple working groups. So our time is really cut short by the SCB working group and this working group and some of the other ones that we're working on as well. So just putting it out there.
I absolutely agree with you. However, we've pretty much screeched to a halt. way far off where we probably should be. And I'm not sure if we can catch back up. So for instance, if we had had a full day meeting today, staff could have gone into their, if we continue on doing these online instead of in person, which has been another topic of conversation. I'm fine with doing it this way, and I appreciate the ability to be able to simulcast this on YouTube so that it satisfies open meetings. But for instance, today, staff could have gone into their own breakout room and talked about its final position on enrollment. And we could have had another breakout room for the utilities and Montgomery County to take a look at. We could have pulled up what staff was going to send around from Ohio, and we could have just gone ahead and started working on that. Keeping in mind, we're getting close to where we're going to be actually drafting. So we are going to be doing a shared document. So there is going to be time where we're going to be all need to sit together for a significant amount of time and make sure that, you know, we're going through line by line what we're going to be submitting to the commission. The parties, some of the parties, the ones that were necessary, have done a great job of meeting offline to try to prepare things for the next meeting. And that's great, but those are not full work group meetings, and not everybody, not all of the parties have been in those meetings, so, or had access to those meetings. Simultaneously, everybody is, you know, doing what you have to do in the off hours to educate yourself, to get to be able to, you know, discuss the issues. I've been working on the trying to keep up so that it's not so laborious at the end, the work group report, so that I can get that to you guys for your comments. So sometimes we may be able to catch up, and that may not be necessary. It kind of depends on, you know, what we get from Montgomery County and what we get from the utilities coming up, and how quickly we can move through the next, you know, small issues. It sounds like our issue for next meeting is a little contentious, and, you know, it just depends on how quickly we can get through things. If we can, you know, do our work in the off time and get through things, then I'm happy to keep the meetings at half day. I'm happy for any suggestions. I'm happy to keep the meetings at half day every other week, as long as we continue to do what we need to do in the background and we get up to speed. But the one thing we can't do is we can't delay in getting regs to the commission. And we're not even anywhere close. So I'm just keeping the option open and letting everyone know that we're going to do what we have to do to get the regs to the commission with, so that they have time to, you know, get them, make their changes and get them passed and do everything so that we can start this thing on time. So I hear what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. I don't want to waste time. I don't like meeting just to meet, but we have a lot of things that we need to get done in the next month, 2 months. So let's just kind of keep our thumb on it and keep talking about it, and we'll see what happens. Does anybody else have anything for the group?
Judge, I think that's good advice. I appreciate that. I think we're going to need to be fairly dynamic about meeting requirements, because it's possible to sort of break the system, because there are just so many technical working groups functioning right now, and there's a lot of folks engaged in all of them. So we'll need to be, and I don't know how much you communicate with some of the other judges or advisory folks that are running working groups, but
I do. I talk to them. Phil, I hear you. I understand you. I agree with you. I do, but we also have to get this done.
well, unfortunately, we have to get it all done.
I agree.
And so you could end up, this might work, but could break another process, which isn't good for everyone generally. But let's play it by ear. And I think we have a good schedule at the moment. But you know, that's high up on our concerns about being able to meet obligations, especially with short turnarounds. I think we're gonna, I think lots of folks have this issue, but we can get there, but we're gonna have to be pretty flexible and dynamic to do it. So I'll stop talking.
Phil, I 100% agree with you. I also know that we're not the only one who would be meeting full day. I also know that there are other working groups that meet every week. I've set the schedule so that we are where we are, but we have dragged. And so I'm not going to try to overburden anyone. That's the last thing I want to do. I'd like for us to be able to work together as a group and get this done. We just have to, take it month by month and see how we're doing and where we are in the schedule. But we have to have a finished product by the day that we have to have a finished product. And so we're going to do what we have to do to get that done. All right, anyone else? Okay, thank you everyone for your hard work, and I'm sorry about the continuing hard work, but I think we got a lot done today, and look forward to seeing a couple things from staff, and look forward to hearing that the utilities and Montgomery County are working together to get us something soon. Thank you very much. We can be done for the day.